Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
What's up? Welcome to episode 52 of the Rewind. You know, some people might ask, how do you manage to come up with content to make a weekly show about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms? Well, the trick is we rely on you, the community, to keep us chugging along, because that's what the show's all about. We find what people are talking about online and we highlight those conversations because not everyone has the time to dig into the dark corners of the internet like we do. And to be honest, those corners can be a little scary sometimes. So that's what we're here for. We like to shine a light on not only community discussions, but also what's going on with Pantheon's development. We like to debate controversies, and we like to introduce new fans to the return of the days of social MMORPGs. But speaking of dark corners, lurking in the shadows with his crafted +3 strength daggers is my amazing co-host, Minus. How are you, man? What's up?
Oh, nothing. I wish now I could go back to Fortress de Valle and get the +3 dex daggers, right? Because so I watched through my video, and Theric, we can openly talk about this because this was all from the video that was out there. This is not NDA at all, right? So we went through and I was watching. I was like, wow, I have all these times I put items on. I can look what happens to my stats, right? So I literally combed that video all through when I was putting on the +3 dagger, when I put on the +3 strength dagger, when I put on the dex one, when I put on a pair of boots, and I figured out that right now, even though it's super secret, that dexterity gives the most attack power per point, then agility, which never would have thought of that, and then strength. So it feels like maybe the rogue is specialized because it is like, it seems like a dexterity agility class, but total mind blown there. So might have done a little math sleuthing. So
I love it, man.
Right?
That's a great way to start the show. Wow. Starting off with a bang today.
And it's not NDA again because this is in the video. I just wasn't paying attention even when I was playing, and I went back and it was there for everyone to see. So again, dug through everything I equipped. You should have saw me like it's like 3-hour video. I was like going through the video trying to see if my inventory screen would pop up, like dragging the thing and then like going back and forth a little bit. It took me freaking forever, but I found all these different moments where I put on like one stat. But again, like it's like 1 dexterity gives 3 attack power to a rogue, 2 attack power per agility, and only 1 per strength. Now the crazy thing is one of the times I put a strength item on, it raised my attack power on my weapon up a little bit. Not my actual attack power, but my weapon damage. So I don't know it because it doesn't always do that. So it was interesting. I don't know. There's definitely some crazy things in there, and they're really hiding what stats mean right now to us from what we've seen. But yeah, dexterity and agility for all you rogues out there. If anybody's testing.
That's crazy, man. Look at what you've done with this tiny little bit of information and you've extracted it into this whole thing. Imagine when the game comes out and all this information you're going to have. You are never going to be, I don't think you're going to sleep again. And I don't think you're going to leave your computer again because
see people need to start believing me. I'm named Minus. I love math. And if I can find these things, we'll have spreadsheets. We'll have all kinds of fun. So
no, man. Crazy. I wish we could go back to Fortress de Valle. I'm dreaming of the day we can go back there. Remember, Joppa talked about that secret nobody's found. I have to go back and check that shit out. So.
I had a question for you because I was watching it just recently. I was actually sending it to somebody who had a question about rogues. And did you go back to where the monks were? There was a book there, like about being a guard or something, like the Book of the Guard or something. Did you see that book in the monk room?
The book on the elect, is that the one you're talking about?
Is that what it was? Maybe it was like right by the combat room. There were like monks in bunk beds.
Yeah, I think the book about the elect is right in there. Yeah, I did read that.
All right, because I saw it and I actually scrolled through it for you. I'm like, oh, just in case Theric doesn't see this. And I'm like, I wonder if he ever.
I think Co saw it too when he played. So I had that already. But there is something in that area. There is definitely something in that area that I got to go back and check out. So
yeah, someday soon, hopefully. All right.
What a great start to the show, man. Wow, you really kicked it up a notch there. I'm pumped now. So let's keep going. Let's introduce our adventuring party for the week. And these are all the folks who donated to last week's Rewind. And as always, we love you. We greatly appreciate all your generous support for the show. It goes right back into the show, as we've said before. So our adventuring party this week consists of We Smoke Bitcoins on the Darkmer Summoner, Dustin Harms on the Archide Druid, Annoying Llama on the Human Monk, Ziplocks on the Darkmer Rogue, Brian Reck on the Gnome Summoner, Crowsinging on the Halfling Druid, Sparrow on the Elf Druid, and Bounty Code on the Human Paladin. So That's our party this week. If you want to join the party for next week, you can donate to this show during the premiere on YouTube by that little $ button in the chat there. And if you do, give your future Pantheon racing class if you haven't donated before, because we already know it if you have. But if you're new to the show and you want to donate, please leave your racing class for Pantheon so we can include you in the group or the raid, as it were, for the next episode. And like we always say, huge thank you to everyone who chooses to support this show. We very much greatly appreciate it. And with that, Minus, you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes.
All right, so VR and social media recap. This is where we talk about what the community is talking about directly from VR, some of the conversations they have on Twitter, or maybe on the forums, or maybe even on Discord. Well, last week we started the official dev tracker segment within here, and we're probably going to need to make some kind of bumper for that eventually.
I was just thinking that. Definitely need a bumper for this. Yeah.
Listen, I'm a guy, if we can make a bumper, I'm going to make a bumper. I love making bumpers.
I think a little shocked that you actually haven't done it already. It's kind of
right?
surprising.
Busy week with the draft and everything else that happened, I guess. So what are you going to do? So we do have a couple new tidbits in two categories here from Joppa himself. So let's go ahead and talk about those. Then we'll jump into the Twitter updates. What do you think there? Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good, man. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk about climbing. So Joppa actually threw two things about climbing. These are in the unofficial Pantheon Discord. So this is out there for everyone to see, no NDA stuff here. But Joppa said there will be some areas where multi-pitch climbing is possible, where the goal is specifically to climb, wait. But many areas are intentionally designed as single pitch, where you need enough climbing skill and resources to make it all the way up in one go. And then, lots of small form areas to notice and climb to quickly, and many areas that are not hard to climb to, but very difficult to notice. So I thought that was a pretty neat little discussion. People were kind of talking about trying to get to different areas climbing. What's the endurance going to matter? How's that going to work? Like, is it always just going to be this wall's really high, so come back later? So he kind of gave some different ideas there. I mean, did that stand out at all for you, or anything like, oh, that's cool? Or
yeah, totally. Anytime climbing comes up, I'm all in. So there's lots actually to break down here that I took from this. So the first one is, it's always a trick to looking at something and judging, can I climb this? In other games where climbing is a mechanic, you have to sort of guesstimate it. And you can ask, maybe there's a hidden ledge where you can regain your stamina that you can't see. And of course, like you said, this brings endurance and endurance enhancing gear into play. So I kind of wonder how, with this sort of perspective on it, how premium, is climbing and endurance gear going to be in the game? Is it going to be really rare? Is it going to be craftable? And if so, super expensive and hard to make? Because with this sort of different ways to approach climbing, when you hear Joppa talk about this stuff, you often hear him say they're crafting the world very finely, right? They're lovingly crafting it. It's, I think, sometimes how he says it. And it's sometimes that worries people because it sort of implies they're spending 6 months making a cliff face, right? And they're putting so much work into it. Of course, that's not the case, but what it tells you is that the world's not being procedurally generated. It's not being copy and pasted, right? If you think about it, what's going to happen here with these situations, with these different avenues of climbing, is you're going to get a lot of emergent gameplay out of it, right?
Yeah.
So
some skill gameplay too. For those people that are really into it, hey, look, okay, so we can get up here, but you got to go here to here, and you got to do it fast, or else you're going to run out of endurance. You have to have at least this much. There becomes this game in climbing itself for people who are really skilled at it, which is kind of cool.
Kind of like climbing in real life, right? If you've ever been wall climbing, that sometimes you have to really reach for those handholds, or throw your leg across the wall to get to that one next ledge or something like that. What I will say is, with what I said about emergent gameplay, it makes me wonder. The more I hear about climbing and how detailed they want to make it, it makes me wonder how the rogue rope and the druid bridge abilities are going to really, are they going to play nice together with this, right?
Yeah.
If they're designing multiple climbing strategies, you don't want to see that get nullified by those class skills, right? You and I both know players love to find ways to break systems, right?
Yeah, they sure do.
So I love cool ideas, and I love Joppa talking about lovingly crafting. I'd hate to see it get sort of nullified by another system that challenges that, so to speak. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And we've heard in the past, Joppa's talked about the fact that rogues may just be better climbers too, as like part of the class lore and class fantasy. They may skill up a little faster and stuff like that. That was talked about a long time ago on like one of the, either on a dev stream or on like a Pantheon plus U or something like that. So that's an interesting thing too. So, I mean, if you're going to be a better climber and you also have the rope, now does climbing a rope still take endurance? Is it just a different way around? So it'll be interesting to see how that works. Can the rogue use his endurance to pull you up? There's a lot of cool things that they could do with that, I think. But because I'm a rogue, I'm totally okay with it. How's that sound?
Yeah, I know. And I'm sure druids probably wouldn't, have a lot to say about it. And like, does it come into play when you're making your character? Are you taking that into account? Like, I really like climbing and I want to be really good at it, right? Like, what other classes might have some climbing, aptitude? Kind of interesting. I love climbing. I'm up for a climbing discussion any day of the week because it's one of my favorite things. And
it's one of those things I think that people that don't understand it or don't like the climbing or say it's gimmicky, I think once they can get their hands on it, they're going to understand why we're so excited about it. I love the climbing. I mean, anybody who says that they want to have a world to adventure in and have a grander sense of discovery, I am telling you, this is a huge piece of it. Like, don't sleep on climbing. We've said this before, but I'll say it again. Don't sleep on climbing. It's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I'm totally on board with that. I think it's going to be one of the secret weapons that Pantheon offers in terms of what sets them apart from the crowd.
For sure. So the next one here, it's only a two-parter today, but the next one here is for the Dire Lord fans out there. And also those who maybe just are tank fans, kind of want to know a little bit more about threat mechanics, but this does tie directly into the Dire Lord themselves. So Joppa had a little bit of a discussion. I've actually included some of the conversation from the community members on the unofficial Discord as well to add a little bit of flavor to exactly kind of what's being responded to, so it makes a little more sense. But basically, Joppa went in and he said, in regards to the Dire Lord, quote, what the Dire Lord lacks in snap aggro ability, they can make up for with higher damage front load potential than the other two tanks. He says, especially at higher levels as their full arsenal unfolds. He then says, plus they have a lot of nasty debuffs to throw in the mix. Aggro acquisition, especially snap, is a bit of a higher skill ceiling for Dire Lords, but with their damage and massive debuff potential, and he quoted Blood Fiend and Splatter, he says they can definitely compete. So little interesting there, different way. A lot of people in MMORPGs are used to the taunt and its mind thing. Wait for taunt to come off cooldown, taunt when you can. Dire Lord's not necessarily going to work that way, but the difference is that, in standard MMORPGs where people are, fighting a long boss fight and then, a DPS goes off during a, big DPS phase and all of a sudden the tank loses threat or something. The Dire Lords, after it's had threat for a while and it builds, it feels like you're not pulling it off. Like that Dire Lord has it on lock, right? So
yeah. The other thing too that Joppa mentions here, and it's just a different approach to aggro, right? So when I think if you're going to play a Dire Lord, your philosophy going in as a tank needs to be different. You need to be thinking like, I'm going to take this thing's health down more with my first few hits, so I don't need to hold it as long, right? If it's dead, it can't hurt us, right? We said that before, that's you love that, right? Yeah. Something that's, if you just kill something, it can't hurt you, right? So I think a Dire Lord needs to have that mentality, whereas a tanks don't have that like typical archetypes of the warrior tank don't have that mentality. They think, just keep it on me and I'll sponge up enough damage until the people who do the damage kill it, right? Dire Lord's got to have a different sort of mentality going in. And I think we'll hear, we're going to hear this a lot. Like, why would I play a Dire Lord over a warrior? But I think that there's a design variance here that is really good in terms of an alternate way to play a tank.
Yeah. So then he was sort of questioned, Joppa was, by a member of the, again, unofficial Discord community. And they said, so in the Devier footage, there were mistakes being made by the Dire Lord player that was allowing mobs to get through to the healer after the group broke CC to attack them. They had a few deaths because of this issue. So Joppa responded, well, that's part of it. Plus, the Dire Lord struggles a bit more with holding multiple mobs at this level, which is something we're watching. He says, I think that the footage primarily is showing the difficulty Dire Lords can have when multiple mobs need to be locked down, which comes back to the proper usage of their debuffs and Blood Fiend / Splatter making a huge difference in those situations. So again, and it's not Nathan's fault, who was playing the Dire Lord. There's a lot of things that were a struggle there. Like healers were getting a lot of aggro while things were CC'd. And that Dire Lord wasn't getting any. So think about a meter going up really high for the healer and the Dire Lord getting 0 from that situation. So there was a little bit of that. And I wouldn't necessarily put that on the plan. It's probably something that's going to be changed, I would guess. So
yeah, well, it's like everything else. It's in development, right? And seeing that, how it worked in that scenario is great feedback, right? It's data. It's information they can use to address. So it's, it makes sense.
So he continued on a little bit. We had another community member said, so it does sound like mob aggro build up on stunned or mez mobs is a thing, excluding the mezzer. So Joppa said, yeah, it's currently a thing. But he went on to say, but since that stream, that's actually what I was just mentioning, we have reworked the way aggro builds for the mezzer as well. He says, in this weekend's test, we saw much more behavior that we wanted, which is the mob sticking to the enchanter after a mez breaks, which I agree with, right? Like if the enchanter's the one mezzing, it shouldn't be the healer getting all the threat. That enchanter should want to be killed too. I would think like if I had a second to break out of an enchanter's like control, that I'm going to kill him. I don't want that to happen again.
Exactly. Joppa said it here, and it's definitely true. I mean, I don't want to say too much, but mezzing a mob should make the mob pretty pissed off. And if that's the case, it is important for the enchanter to be able to communicate to the group that Mez is about to come off. But, I'm glad Joppa's acknowledging that, they need to maybe tweak that a little bit, because you want the enchanter should be target number 1, I guess, if you were Mez, like you said, should be coming after you, right?
Yep. And then the final thing he mentioned, he was asked by someone else. He says, does the Dire Lord gain aggro through any self-heals? And Joppa responded very simply, yep, all self-healing generates aggro for the DL as well. So for the Dire Lord there. So interesting mechanic too, right? Yeah. So I'm sure the Paladin, then that means will also gain that. So that's something that the Paladin and Dire Lord will have that'll help with aggro generation a little bit more maybe than the Warrior. So, where the Warrior may have snap aggro, and I'm just spitballing here. We don't know much about the Warrior. But if the Warrior has this great snap mechanic, that taunt to pull you in, they don't get maybe some of the things to hold it long term. So they're constantly fighting to keep that aggro, constantly taunting. It's not a build up like you might have for the Dire Lord, or again, just because the Paladin can heal a little bit to be able to get a little bit of that extra aggro. So Warriors will have to do it in a different way.
Yeah, it's a really big point. It's actually it's almost like a double benefit for the Dire Lord, right? Because they're healing themselves, but they're also generating threat. So you want that. I mean, that loops back to what we talked about at the very beginning about them not, people saying, well, they don't generate the aggro, they don't hold the threat like a Warrior does. But this gives them the ability to actually increase that. So, what if you have a Warrior in your group? Does the Dire Lord's healing then become a liability, which is sort of looking at it from the other perspective, right? Because you don't want to be taking it off off the Warrior necessarily. You want to leave it on the Warrior. So, but if you're healing as a Dire Lord, that might become a liability. So
healing as a Dire Lord. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, it's self-healing, right?
Self-healing, yeah.
So
I'm just making sure. I was like, wait, are you trying to see a Dire Lord being the main healer of a group? What are you talking about? Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. No. Like if they're in DPS mode, and they're healing, that makes sense.
So yeah, I mean, just keep in mind that you're not always going to have that perfect group where it's like, you have exactly the tank or the one you want, but you got to make it work. So I like the flexibility of the Dire Lord here. So it's a good point.
Yeah, I love this. I hope Joppa keeps poking his head in there. It gives us great content, but also it's fun to get this stuff out to people because, again, I think a lot of this conversation is missed. I think most people probably aren't hearing this, so hopefully it helps you guys. And that's it for the Dev Tracker section of the VR News and Notes. So now let's jump into, so last week we didn't cover the Twitter questions, so we had a ton of Dev Tracker stuff to talk about. And we kind of said like some of the topics were, maybe they weren't as discussion heavy as we could normally get out of them, right? Well, good news. These two are completely discussion heavy, and I'm sure me and you are going to disagree on some of this, so it'll be fun to talk about, right? Yeah. So the first one here is, would you rather race to the end game to raid and compete in high-end content, or slow down, take your time, and enjoy everything the game has to offer when Pantheon releases? This is a fun one. So the first one here is from Wizen. He says, I'll take my time, thanks. There's a whole world full of incentives to do just that. I'd be missing out on huge things if I rushed. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Dan Johnson says, I'll be taking it slow and enjoying mid-level content. I remember the Tomb of Lord Sang in Vanguard. Vanguard. It was only level 18 through 22-ish, but it felt like such an epic adventure. He says, I want to recapture the experience if I can. He put SOH and I forgot it was called Saga of Heroes. Like my brain melted for a second. I'm like, SOH.
I was going to throw it in there, but I wasn't sure if you were going to get there or not. I'm like,
at the end, I remembered what it meant. As long as I was like seeing the logo, right? But the SOH threw me off. So he says, really trying to find those fun experiences. That's a good point because we were recently talking about dead mines and how much I loved dead mines in World of Warcraft and like the vanilla. And I think that was like a level 16 to 18, maybe dungeon that I spent just tons of time in. It's one of my fondest memories of a dungeon. So I can kind of relate to that one. That's pretty cool.
That's sometimes where the sweet spot is in a lot of MMOs, right? It's not the high end end game. It's not the very beginning stuff. It's that mid range, 18 to 25, 20 to 30 sort of range. I'm trying to think of what.
Well, you know what it is? You know what it is too? So you go in and like Dead Mines was a large dungeon. So it was a challenging dungeon. And you did it a ton. You would level up, you would get gear, you would farm for money even, just the money that would drop off everything. Like it was worthwhile doing all the time. But what was neat is because it was lower level, as you became stronger and stronger, you'd keep going back to see if maybe you could solo through it in certain parts and there'd still be some challenges. But when you got that moment of being able to run the dungeon by yourself and kind of solo through this dungeon as a young adventurer you struggled in, it's fun because you don't always get that from high level dungeons, right? Because like for games that don't do expansions quick, you don't really get to be so strong that you can go back and explore it on your own. But in that level range, you can always kind of get high enough to go back and like take vengeance, right? So
I love that. Yeah, no, I used to do that all the time for sure. I remember when I'd go back to any dungeon in EverQuest and Blackburrow, right? For example, he died so much in the beginning, and I went back when I was in my 20s just to see how far I could go down to the very bottom and see what was down there, right? Yeah, fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Caraborn says, an endgame of some form is typically what leads most people to stay involved in an MMORPG long term. So far, I don't think Pantheon has really mentioned what its endgame is. I don't see myself speeding to the end of it, however, because it's usually locked for a month anyways. So interesting. Yeah, there's really a whole lot of what's endgame going to look like. I think just some assumptions, but yeah, that's a good point. Nathan Napalm says, in a lot of MMORPGs, I rush. But since Pantheon is being carefully tested and calculated to be engaging and challenging from beginning to end, I'm going to spend more time doing the journey with alts to do over and over again. I will try not to have 12 paladins.
He'll try not to have 12 paladins.
I think he needs to change his handle to Nathan the Dire Lord. I mean, I'm just a recommendation here.
Did you see that comic that Drac did about that? That was really funny where he becomes Rakameldon at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That was great.
That was really good. Those are amazing. I don't know how he got everybody to look like they do. It's pretty funny. Furious Pierre says, I'd like to get to the end, but I stop at rating. If a game lets me scale back and help friends, I'm in. I actually loved EQ2 for that. So that's great. And we've kind of heard about a mentor system being possible in Pantheon. So I really hope that it is, because I think that would be awesome.
I think a lot of people actually do that too. I'm not surprised to hear him say that, because I think a lot of people want to get to the point where they can help others. They don't really care. I mean, not they don't care, but their goal is not to get to the rating, get to their personal goals. They want to go back and help other people with their leveling process and bring them up. So getting there first, they rush to get there first so that they can do that. Because if you don't rush, you can't do that, right?
Yep. No, I have fun with that too. I can definitely say that. Like, once some of the stress of getting to the level I want to, like take a break, go down and help people is really enjoyable.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Basgrim says, from what I know of Pantheon, he knows a lot about Pantheon. So that's a good statement. From what I know about Pantheon, the raids won't all be at max level. So there'll be enjoyable content at every level. So why race to the top other than to feed some sort of weak ego? I want to test to see if Pantheon actually holds up as an MMO that rewards you for taking your time. He actually got into a nice little debate with someone. I was like, why is leveling quickly an ego thing? And he kind of backed off of that. So I don't want Basgrim to sound bad with that. Like, he had a good explanation. I definitely agree with the term had he not had that discussion, because for me, and we'll get more into my thoughts on it, but Theric, like, I don't rush through MMORPGs because I want to rush through. I rush through because I'm obsessed with playing the game. I want to see more. I want the next ability. I want the next piece of gear. I want to be more powerful to help people. It's not like I don't ever sit there and say, I don't want to see all this. I want to get to the end. I say, oh, what's next? Oh, I want that. Oh, I want that. Oh, I want that. What's that? Oh, like squirrel. That's how I am. And I don't think there's an ego behind that. I think it's just like it's name any other game type I've ever played for 24 hours straight. It's only MMOs, and there's a reason. I don't want to stop. I'm immersed. It's exciting. I'm running around. I'm experiencing. So I don't know. We'll get more into that at the end of this when we kind of break down our thoughts on it. But I don't think it's always an ego thing. Yeah.
No, I don't think it is either. I'm glad to hear you backed off on that.
Yeah. So Breakout says, I want to do it all. I want to level at my own or my group's pace. I want to raid every raid the world has to offer. I want to craft his own mana potions. Sorry, the Twitter. You have to fit stuff in. Craft my own mana potions. Maybe something a little more exciting as well. I want it all. I love Drax's response here. I'd like to say I'll slow down, but that's a lie. I love to level fast as possible.
Oh man, no, I have another person to hold back to try and hold their hands. I'm gonna be like carrying two dogs on a leash with like the leashes are pulling.
Me and Drac will just be dragging you by one hand each. Guys, I'm tired, and you're just dragging your body. Like totally. You're like looking up at the sky, and we're just pulling your arms, and your butt's dragging on the ground.
Yeah, that's gonna happen. You guys.
Ang says, woof. I like that he starts with woof. He has a picture of a dog too. Woof. That's a hard one. It's a middle ground as in cutting edge, but not bleeding edge. I want to have fun, but not feel like I'm left behind. I think that's a great thing. Right.
Yeah. Kind of there too. That's the trade-off, right? I'll talk about that too.
Yeah. A couple more here. Prismatic Dave says, friends, they say, let's all just level together this time and enjoy everything about the game has to offer. 1 week later, bro, I'm level 30 and you're still 20. What's wrong?
Yeah, man. People have said that to me. I know that's how it is, right?
Yeah.
That's totally how it is.
I don't ever want to be the guy that's at 20 ever. Like, so that's, I don't want to be behind. I have such a fear of holding people back in anything in life. Like, no joke. I do. Really? And I have no problem being ahead of people and helping pull them to me, but I hate being on the other side. Like I get subconscious about it for no reason. No reason at all. It's like this self-pressure I put on myself. It's kind of funny.
It's so funny. I don't have that at all. I completely don't have that. I'm very much like, I worry about getting too far ahead because I'm like, I don't want to lose you guys. Like it's totally reverse in my mind. That's so interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. So JJ, a couple more, like I said, JJ said, I just want to feel a sense of meaningful progression in both power and story. I don't care how long it takes. Obviously, if it's too fast, that can take you out of it. But as long as I'm engaged and everything feels natural, then the journey should outweigh a timetable. Great. Nice. I love that point. That's a great point. Yeah. And finally, Scribbles, who is one of the developers at Defend the Night. Everybody should know Scribbles by now. Good friend of the Pantheon Plus team. He says, I'm a socialite. Most likely I'll stand in the town square and sing songs of my travels and wee expeditions. So Theric, why don't you forever? Yeah. Theric, why don't you answer the question on your terms then? So what do you think?
Yeah. Well, so man, oh man. So everybody knows we've done PA testing, and that's not a secret. I struggle because I do want to be with the groups. Like I want to be with our friends, and I want to do things, and I want to be, at the same level. But part of me really, really wants to go off on my own, slow down, take the world in. Like I know that right now, that's not really. I don't worry about it so much right now because of the phase we're in right now. But when the game comes out and launches, it's gonna be so hard for me to keep up with you guys because I just don't move fast like that. I tend to whether it's like a value thing, like I want to get the most value out of my time, which means doing as much as not doing as much as I can do, but doing the widest amount of things that are available to me. So I just don't want to move ahead of things before I outlevel them, right? Outleveling things in an MMO has been something that's bugged me in the past where I really liked this dungeon that I knew about, but I was doing another dungeon at the time and I outleveled it. So I never went and did it, right? Yeah. And I know you can say alts and stuff like that, but then you do that thing where you have, 3 or 4 alts and you're still slow, right? You're still left behind because you're not catching up with everybody else. So you guys are good. It's going to be really tough. And I love that you guys pull me along with you because I do need that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm probably annoying the hell out of you though sometimes.
Yeah. And I'm going to need you to do that because if you don't, I'm going to just fall so far behind. So yeah, I'm not a rusher. I'm slow and steady, man.
Don't judge it too much on testing phases. I mean, they've announced that, people know it's not a long period of time to test. If we don't move fast, we don't really get to achieve anything. There's not really time to go off on your own and test spells and do that kind of stuff, right? Like we just don't have the way that we're testing right now. We don't have the chance to do that. And that's not NDA breaking. I feel like I have to say that a lot. That's known. That's stuff that they've announced in newsletters and stuff like that. So I think the play that we're forced to do in testing is going to be a lot different. Now, yeah, I mean, it's like the whole dog seeing a squirrel thing, man. Like, if I see something cool, I'm like, Theric, let's go look at that. Or Theric, look, there's this enemy. Can we kill it? Or Theric, he has a sword in his hand. I want it. Let's kill him 7,000 times and see if he drops it. I'm also very dungeon heavy. So like when we get to a dungeon, like I will be the annoying guy in the guild. Like, hey, everybody, what's up? Everybody's like, hey, Minus, welcome on tonight. Hey guys, everybody playing tonight? Yeah. Anybody have any groups? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to this dungeon. Who wants to come? Minus, we've done that dungeon 3 straight nights. Yeah. So who wants to come? We didn't get all the gear. It was some good link. Like, what if we find a rare? I love being in dungeons. I don't know why it's more exciting to me than being in an open world that is essentially an open world dungeon, but I just need to be in a dungeon. I don't get it. I love it so much. I'm like Drac, every game I've played, I have rushed a level. And when I say rushed a level, again, it's not to skip content. It's because I obsess over what's next. What can I do next? Oh, let's do this. Oh, I leveled. Let's see this new spell. It's like I don't want to stop discovering. I want to take Pantheon slower. I've told you I used to have a lot of alts. I want to just play a rogue for a very long period of time. I want to master that class and I want to take it slow. I want to explore, especially as a rogue. I can go almost anywhere sometimes. So yeah, I'm like Drac. Like I want to go slow and maybe because of all the time we've spent, maybe I can, but I do also fear like Drac, like I won't be able to resist the carrots of leveling and pushing and going forward. So we'll see.
Well, as long as you've never regretted it, if you've never regretted it in an MMO before, then you should just do what comes naturally, right? Like you don't want to, you don't want to force yourself to do something that you're not comfortable with. And it's like me too. Like as much as I will want to keep up with you and the guild and everybody, I can't fight myself. I'm going to go slow. I'm going to do lore things. I'm going to, just spend time in the environments and I just do what I do, right? I care what I want to be with the guild, but at the end of the day, I want to do what I want to do too, right?
But you know what's really cool about that? When you're like, let's say I do get ahead of you and you're like, oh, Minus, I need to kill this thing. Oh, don't worry, buddy, I'm coming. And then like flex my rogue powers and be like, we got it. And like come in as a badass. Like I love that feeling. I love that feeling. Right.
So it just meets everybody's needs, right? So it's all good. Exactly. It's a good dynamic.
No, everybody in our guild, don't worry, play at your own pace. But those who want to go, we'll probably have some people that want to go. So that's awesome.
I'm gonna create the slow division of our guild, the slow and steady.
Oh, that's funny. We'll have like little tags. Okay, so the next question here, we're going on a bit here for the VR news and notes. I hope that's okay for everybody.
Yeah, it's fine, man. I can go long. I don't care.
So Kilson did it. He resurrected an old topic, which I thought was dead. And we have covered before, but it's been a while and I wanted to read some of these comments and see where your head is because it's been such a long time. And I also want to get into somebody's thoughts on it that shocked me a little bit. So the question is, what are your thoughts on how many spells and abilities should be allowed to have on one hotbar? So he brought back limited action and discussion around it, which I thought we were past, but we're not, Theric. So first, cold fire, and this is all over the board. So I'm reading some of the more well thought out comments here. I tried to balance it, but it's probably 50-50 if you read the comments. So Coldfire 989 says exactly how you have it now. Limited to 8 to 10 spells and the same utility and buffs. You do not need 30 buttons at all. Love that answer. That's really close to where I'm at. So we'll get into that more. The next one here is from Adam. He says, I think it depends on how many abilities a class gets. In 20 plus years of MMOs, I've found it far more fun not to be limited. The number on the hotbar should be proportional to the number you might actually use in combat. It has a far higher skill strategy ceiling and less downtime. So he kind of just wants all his abilities, so to speak.
Yeah, everything.
Yep. Libwick said LAS was designed for strong reasons and has a lot of potential, but it's different than past MMOs, so people don't get it because they haven't played it yet. I didn't hear the group in the eval group talking about us, he said, complaining. Rather, they were stoked on working together and the challenge of it all. Synergies between spells makes the timing knowledge of them challenging, especially between all the classes. People will be able to think more about how groups are playing. Most engaging group mechanics build on that. LAS sets roles very well. So tenets accomplished. Don't follow the community, lead it VR. So he saw
I
a
can
lot
say
of
that about a lot of things. I like
Yeah.
that perspective.
Yep. Fendrell says, oh yeah, this is my biggest concern with Pantheon from what I've seen. I prefer to have my whole kit and knowing when and how to use it will be able to show my own skill. When you reduce my abilities to a build, tons of people will just take what works and never play with it. So the interesting thing here, Theric, is this post was responded to by Basgrim, who said, I completely agree. Here's an interview I did with Joppa where we talked about it. So I know that Basgrim has been against LAS for a little bit, but I thought, and I responded to Baz, I said, you're still against LAS? This is shocking to me. Because I thought once he had the interview with Joppa, he's like, no, I get it now. It makes more sense. I think Joppa answered a lot of the questions. So I thought Basgrim sort of was on the LAS train, but it turns out he's still against it. Too. Yeah. So I was very shocked. Like Basgrim's kind of coming out against a lot of stuff recently. Like, you know, he's against, you know, how the nameplates are. He's against, so hey, more power to him. Awesome. But I was just very surprised by this one personally, because I thought he was more on board with it. It's kind of a big shock to me. Like I want to actually maybe find a way to have him on a show and us talk this out. I think it would be fun.
Yeah, we should. Yeah,
right?
it would be fun.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
Anyway, yeah, moving on. Crowsinger says, I really like limited action set, but would it bother me to bump the action bar up to 10? No. Would it bother me? What would bother me is if it was more like EQ2 syndrome. Yes. Nobody, please. We don't want that. Oh my gosh.
No, don't do that.
Situational kits force you to plan, much like in D&D, where you had to decide what spells you want to memorize. Jorgen Wickstrom says 12 abilities on a hotbar, 5 to 10 hotbars. Changing spells loadouts was never really a big issue. And if you're restricted to say 8 skills, how can you optimize an encounter if you don't know which 8 out of the 20 skills I'm going to use? That's not a bad discussion point there, but you're building for a full group. And because of the group synergies there, that's the only thing I'd kind of debate against that with what he said about like designing an encounter. Like if an encounter is designed, you know, what did we say? I said a long time ago, like, don't look at it as I have 8 abilities. You have 6 people in your group. So you have 8 times 6, 48 action abilities in your group. If you can't solve an encounter with 48 abilities, sums up.
Yeah. And then that was Joppa's statement when he did the interview with Baz that you referenced. That was what I thought at the time when I watched that interview, convinced Basgrim that this is a system that makes sense for Pantheon. Right. So I like that rationale, and it's helped me get to a point where I can understand it and I can appreciate why it works for this type of game.
Yeah. Dan Scholes says, as many as I want. Will I have limitations? Verano says, I prefer to have a set number, and you have to choose which spells and abilities to put in there. It allows for different types of play styles, and it makes each player's character unique. Love that. It's kind of what we were just saying in a way.
Yeah.
2 more. Basement RPG says, I liked EQ's method. Limited number, but given the opportunity, you can switch out spells out of combat. Or in combat, he said. The wizard notices an ice spell is being resisted. The tank has good aggro. The wizard sits, opens the spellbook, and scribes a new spell. So he likes it, but once in combat swaps. I don't think right now Pantheon's going to have it in combat. It would have to be out of combat. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that seems just like, it just seems
clunky,
tedious. Yeah, clunky and tedious. I don't know why you would do it like that. Like, you know, either do completely open where I can have as many hotbars as I want with all my skills, or make it like limited action set like we have. That doing it that way just makes it like just a chore, I guess.
And finally, Kanano says, I always like the idea of having many spells, skills, and spellbook, but somehow limiting the numbers on the hotbar. For example, a maximum of 12. This makes you do research about your class and do interesting stuff with it. But as many mentioned, no limit of like 4 to 6. No. So he wants that like 10, 12 range and more. So.
Yeah, which is, it seems like the direction that it's gone. That they've tinkered with it a little bit, in terms of the passives and the action bar. If you look back at old VR streams, it looks a little different. I think there were less abilities back in the old days. They maybe increased it a couple here and there.
Well, when they broke it into, the utility abilities, that was new, right? Like at first you only had, was it maybe 10 to 12 slots completely? And then they said, well, we're going to do 8 action and 6 utilities. So now you have 14. So you actually have more, but now we're going to kind of classify spells. So it makes a little more sense. So yeah, I am a huge fan of where it's at now. That very first comment by Coldfire and also what Libwick said, I'm totally on board with them. I think where it's at is right now is important for 2 reasons, Derek. One, it's how the game's being designed. If the game is being designed from the ground up to limit players, to increase challenge and to drive group synergy, then it's going to work fine. It's one of those things you can't add in later, or you can't decide later in development to limit spells. They did this since day one. And that's why I think it's going to work really well, because everything, what abilities a class has, what encounters are going to be like, how dangerous the world is all going to be tied into how these spell sets can work. Right. And I love it. I mean, you saw me, I took a bunch of support style stuff. Really didn't worry as much about the attack stuff. Put mastery into the support stuff that I could, or things that would help me support. And I played a support rogue, and it was a blast. And I love that you can. Someone could say, well, if you had all your abilities, you could do that too. But it's not the same. Like if I had all my abilities, I would just do everything. But it was cool to say this is my role. And if there was another rogue in the group, to be like, hey, that's your role. So you're the DPS rogue. I'm this. Let's do it. Let's go. That's really cool to me.
I liked what Crowsinger said. What she said resonates with me, because she goes back to D&D, right? Just think about when you played a spellcaster in D&D, you had to select which spells you wanted to memorize, or if you're a cleric to get from your god. It's always about choice, and making choices is interesting, and having that to use your intellect, your wisdom, to see a need for a certain skill or a certain spell is interesting. Not having to make a choice, it doesn't do anything for me. It completely takes my agency out of it. And I want to have agency in my character, in my role in a group, like you talked about, with being able to use a more CC build by choosing which skills you want on your bar and how you work it. So I like that. I've come around. I didn't know. I really was sort of not uninformed, but didn't have a strong opinion about the limited action set when we sort of first started discussing it back in the day. And I've come along. Yeah, I'm on board with it now.
Awesome. Well, it was a little bit longer today for the VR news and notes, but really awesome, fun topics. Good viewpoints there from you, Theric. Thank you for that. But let's go ahead and jump into our next category here.
When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about. All right, so community discussion for this week. In the last developer stream, there was an interesting topic near the end that Joppa seemed really excited about. And it was actually 2 things. He talked about nighttime in Pantheon as well as underwater zones. And I want to go back and listen to that when I have a chance, because it was really, really good. I actually did go back, and I would encourage everybody else to go back and listen to that clip, because he sort of gives a really good explanation of where Pantheon's leaning and what the mindset is in designing underwater zones in the world. We've seen that in a bunch of different games, and somebody on Reddit wanted to sort of get a sense of, how has underwater zones been done in other MMOs? So Maximus Velocity on Reddit said this. He said, quote, "I'm excited to see how VR handles movement, exploration, mob density, and visibility in an underwater environment. Anyone have a recommendation for a game that did it well?" So the discussion this week is about what Pantheon's version of underwater exploration compares to what we've seen in other games. So here's what some people said about that. First up was Darktastrophe, and they said, "I really wish I could combine the early features and late features of World of Warcraft to make the perfect underwater experience. WoW has recently done a lot of underwater stuff, and the single best feature was to make movement faster on the ocean floor. However, they're far too forgiving with breath times, and anything you need to be in the water, you somehow end up with a buff giving you infinite breath, completely defeating the anxiety of underwater fighting. Moving faster on the ocean floor is a genius psychological trick that makes players evaluate risk and reward, makes you scared to explore new depths. Over here in the shallows, I can move quickly and surface easily. If I go too deep, simple snare can be the death of me. Minus, did you, as a WoW player, did you experience underwater zones? What are they like in WoW? I never did it.
I did not experience that running on the ground thing. But yeah, in one of the expansions, and I cannot believe I'm not remembering which one it was. Might have been Cataclysm. There was an underwater leveling area, like completely. And you could get an underwater seahorse mount. And it was, let me put it this way. I did it once and I never wanted to go back. I never did that zone ever again. I did it all once.
Question.
I'll get into this more. I have a very, very strong opinion based on past gaming about water. So
interesting.
Yeah,
great.
I'll get into it more.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to it now. I didn't know whether you'd have a strong opinion about this one. That's great. The next up on Reddit was Ultra, and they said Guild Wars 2 did really well with underwater content. When you're in/underwater, your combat skills change.
Hold on. You're having a hard time even reading that with a straight face. I feel bad for Ultra, but yeah.
Recent experience with this, and I'll comment on this too, but man, oh man, yeah, Guild Wars 2. The only criticism that Ultra said is that some of the AoE type skills are difficult to use, since judging distance underwater is hard when the Z-axis makes a difference in active combat. Otherwise, Guild Wars 2's underwater combat is the best benchmark I have to analyze. So here's what I want to say about that. Like, I would take the other aspect of it. Guild Wars 2's underwater combat is really bad. The underwater exploration in Guild Wars 2 is really, really good. There's interesting parts, and there's a lot of underwater content in Guild Wars 2. There are parts where you have to really dive down to the bottom of like a wrecked ship, and there's like a Guild Wars 2 does all these like, points of interest and like find the little thing on the map thing. And I enjoy that part of it. I actually enjoy that part of it because I like, swimming down deep and getting into like little nooks and crannies, but the combat in Guild Wars 2 underwater is so
one. Okay, the boss is dead. That's what I remember. Didn't we fight a boss underwater and we just one? Okay, no threat. This big thing is dead. All right, great. Yeah. Let's move on.
Well, to be fair, that's overwater.
To be fair,
Guild Wars 2. It's pretty much everywhere. Yeah. But the skills are so different when you don't use them like. I don't know. It really was a sort of an obtuse system to use in Guild Wars 2, but I'll give it kudos for the exploration system. So,
okay.
The next one was Mason to Mason, and they said not that the game was any good, but ArcAge had a decent amount of ocean underwater content. It was mainly around PvP, but there was a lot of exploration, farming, and fishing to be done. So that's kind of cool.
ArcAge was a good game. It's different.
Yeah, I'd never played
It's very, very different, and it's very PvP heavy at the end. It's not an awful game. And
yeah, and I've seen you've talked about it, and I've seen some footage with like the big ships, like the big seafaring ships and stuff in that game. It's pretty cool.
Some cool water combat.
Yeah. Sengoku 116 said Final Fantasy 14 did it well with the Ruby Sea. You also have the best tribe down there and a collector NPC for gathering. So that's kind of cool.
I don't remember that. That might have been after me.
Yeah, no, I never experienced that part of Final Fantasy 14. Bison ST said, I honestly don't care one way or another on underwater zones. I explored them so infrequently in other games. They do have a mystique for difficulty, though, so using them for late game zones, gated by acclimation requirements, would make sense. Dark Mirror being aquatic, though, might mess with that. So, yeah, he touches on something there about, like, because Pantheon's making a race that is, from the water originally, they really have to get this right. So, yeah. And then the last comment from Reddit here is Riker0, and they said, I hope Pantheon has some underwater areas, dungeons. I feel like this was one of many hallmark features of EverQuest. Yeah, Kedge Keep was janky, but I also loved it, and I thought it was the coolest thing back in the day. I also loved Plane of Water, and Koronov was one of my favorite fights in EQ. Underwater stuff just feels like an afterthought in a lot of MMOs. New World doesn't even have swimming implemented yet, and the game's supposed to come out in a few months. So that's a good point. I mean, I think of Kedge Keep for sure when I think of an underwater zone.
Did you do Kedge Keep?
A lot. Yeah, I did Kedge Keep a lot. I
think I went in once or twice. I was like, this sucks. Never went back.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So let's hear your thoughts about Underwater, because you had a strong opinion and that leads into it really well. So
my hate for every water game that's ever existed that isn't a racing game, it comes all the way back from playing NES and Super Mario. The water levels sucked. I mean,
they did suck.
They
Absolutely,
sucked.
they did. Yeah.
Like the water level in the game, like you couldn't go at your own pace. I'm a hold the run button down and go guy. So the only thing worse than a water level were those levels that moved by themselves in Mario, where like you had to just go at the pace that it wanted to go left to right. Those were awful too. But water levels have been awful since freaking Mario. Do you remember them in Tomb Raider when you had to swim? How awful it was. It was freaking
I like
awful.
Those though.
Oh,
those
awful.
are good.
Awful. Now here's the funny part. Every time graphics upgrades, like when a new generation of graphics come, the first thing I do is, oh my God, look at the water. It looks amazing, right? It's always like the benchmark for new graphics. Water, look at that. That's so true. I don't enjoy water in games. Like I liked Jet Moto. I liked like Wave Racer because I stayed on top of the water, right? But any game with water levels, I've never said, oh, I'm so happy that water level's in the game.
That's so funny.
Listen, in an MMO, it needs to be there. The exploration needs to be there. Dark mirror, all that. I don't, and I hope they prove me wrong, and I hope there's some really cool stuff. But man, I have never thought to myself, I can't wait to go do something underwater in a game, any game, no games. I don't like it. I know there's that big adventure game that came out like on the Switch or I don't know, PlayStation or something where you could like swim underwater and explore. No interest in playing that. None. I heard it's great. No interest.
Funny that you mentioned that. That is a perfect segue to what I want to say about this, because the idea for this discussion, and I maybe didn't realize it at the time, but like the day before I got my notes together for this, I was looking at trailers for games coming out and I saw the new expansion for Subnautica. It's a game I've talked about before.
Is that the game I was just referring to, Subnautica? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think it was.
Yeah.
It was. But man, oh man, I love that game. I spent a lot of time with Subnautica, and they have an expansion coming out. It's like a frozen world sort of expansion. But one of the things, so I kind of got in my head, like, what do I love? What about that game made me love underwater stuff? And I think there's a few points. That depth means danger, right? So a lot of this is like there's a parallel in real life. Like the further down you go, the harder things get, right? And if you've ever watched like those ocean like documentaries, like have you seen some of those crazy creatures that live down there, like where there's like no oxygen and no light? Like these are true monsters. Like they're crazy stuff. And I love it in a game, like when they do stuff like that. Subnautica does that really well. The further down you go, you start seeing like glimpses in the distance of like a giant dragonfish. Anyway, it's super cool, terrifying, but cool. The other aspect is there's less light. And one of the things we saw in the evaluation build, right, is how VR is using darkness to create challenge, to create atmosphere and create tactical considerations. I think underwater places are perfect for this. Joppa talked about in the video, he talked about murky depths, right? He wants to feel like, the depths are closing in around you, so to speak. And, when I hear murky, I always think of like games using like limited draw distance to create like a murky sort of fog in front of you. Yeah. Like, don't do that, right? Let's do it like darkness, because that's what it feels like to have a blanket sort of getting tighter and tighter around you as you go deeper and deeper down. One of the other things I thought about was like, how like as you get like further down, your comms can get disrupted, like your communication with your group mates could get disrupted. Something like that would be pretty cool. And I think that, losing connection with your group mates who are there with you might give you that sort of unsettled feeling of the being in the depths. And then the last thing is it just sort of makes me wonder about, the pressure environments and the anaerobic environments that they're going to do with their climates and atmosphere systems. How is this going to get implemented? But it's such a cool environment. I'm glad you mentioned Tomb Raider, because I hadn't even thought of Tomb Raider. And I
hated the underwater Tomb Raider levels.
I just played the most recent Tomb Raider not that long ago, and
I'm talking like original Tomb Raider PlayStation. It was janky. Those too.
So yeah, they were janky because they were just old, but the new ones are so good when you go underwater. And I know that holding your breath, it's like it sort of adds that timer to what you're doing, but. Man,
the funny part is like, you notice how people made fun of me, like not made fun of me, but laughed at like when I was playing Fortress Dive Air and I was in stealth, I'd start to whisper Did you catch on any of that by any chance?
I did. That's right. Yeah.
So like, I just imagine like if I'm underwater, like, and I'm like, it's like my breath's running out. I could actually see myself like sitting here, like
holding your breath. Next thing we know, bunk, minus hits the floor. It's like minus hello.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
How's that for immersion?
You know what? That's exactly right. That's what you're looking for, right? That's immersion to the greatest degree. So anyway, I love underwater zones. I'm glad that Joppa talked about it so passionately. We should definitely do another conversation about what he said about darkness too for a future episode, because that was really good too.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to exploring some underwater caverns, and you may be dragging me along to level quickly up, but I'm dragging you down to the depths with me, man. You're coming.
I might
with
have
me
to be a dark mirror. These conversations make me afraid. I'm gonna have to be a dark mirror, I think. No, I'm kidding.
There you go. Right on. Anyway, so it was a good discussion. Go check it out on Reddit. There's links in the description here and the show notes to both the video, the dev stream video with Joppa talking about it, and to the discussion on Reddit. So let's no introductions this week, but we do have a fan fiction project to give a shout out to. Our friend Crowsinger finished up her story, Hunting in Ember, with chapter 6. And also a link in the show notes. She put together a PDF version of the entire story for if you missed the first few chapters, you can just get it all at once and read it, it's really good. She started a new story called Oasis, and just about the Dark Mirror, just like we were talking about. So if you're interested in Dark Mirror, that might be a story that you're interested in. And again, link in the description to the forums thread with the chapter 1 of that story. So keep on writing, Crowsinger. We love it. And that's it for this week's community discussions.
Here's the mail, it never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it gets here, I just yell, mail! We're getting sued. All right, so this week we're going to wrap up with the mailbox. And we have, looks like about 3 questions here from some of the people in the community that we're going to go through. And let's just get at it. So JJ asks, with all the talk of with all the talk of perception stories, quests, nighttime activity, content being king, etc., VR has some pretty high ambitions for Pantheon. Some of those ambitions casually get dropped on our lap as a spilled bean when their previous ambitions aren't even fleshed out or implemented in any of their builds. With such a small team, do you think that they are promising more than they can deliver? I ask because this has been a voiced concern among the community members, and I would love to hear an open discussion on it. You want me to go first on that one?
Yeah, you know what? Go ahead.
Okay. So I do worry about it. I'm being completely honest. It's not that I don't think the team can deliver. I think they will, but everything takes more time. I definitely worry when I feel like a decision's being made to appease a vocal minority within the community. Now, let me preface by saying I don't think this happens often. Maybe not at all. Maybe VR's been more headstrong than I believe in sticking to their guns and driving their vision. And I pray that they do that. Even things I say, throw it out. Who cares? I just want their vision to be strong. I will tell you the things that bother me. A lot of the developing these systems to toggle on and off things that they're doing, it just seems like a waste of time to me. If you're going to make a system, believe in it, it shouldn't be toggled. Number 1. Number 2, I don't believe in this and maybe it's not always VR. I think Brad might have said things like this in the past and just gets carried on and on. But everyone's like, oh, just make a server that does this or a server that does that or a server that, please God, no. No MMORPG makes a server for every type of player. It's ridiculous. Like there needs to be a PvE server, a PvP server, and a role-playing server. And to be honest with you, there's another one I don't want them to focus on at all, and that's PvP. So more than anything, make a PvE and an RP server, and let's have at this game. The reason we actually pledged in. So yeah, stuff like that bothers me. And maybe there's no reason for me to be bothered. Maybe they're not going to do all that nutty stuff. It's just funny to me, like, to think all these servers weren't made. And the reason is because people play emulators so much now and people tweak stuff in the emulator code. And I'm going to make a emulator time locked progression server. First of all, I hate emulation servers. Hate them. I don't like playing them. I don't want to ever play P99. I just don't want to play it. I don't care. I don't care about some server that some guy made with his roles and they're going to run it with an iron fist. There's no interest whatsoever in playing those things. And I think that so many people in our community and so many people in MMORPGs say their best experiences on emulation servers. No, it's not true. So yeah, the thing with being able to deliver, let's make a PvE server, a roleplay server. Good job. Get rid of the toggles. Just make people play the game you actually made and have confidence in it. And don't get all these weird, crazy ideas to appease 5 people in the community, please. But yeah. Sorry, a little bit of a rant.
You know what No, man. I'm glad you said that about emulators. That's very interesting. You know what it makes me think of? I don't know if you were big in like modding single player games, like not MMOs, but like, no, and me neither. Right. And, I think for the same reason that you're against the emulation is because I think it dilutes the vision of the people who develop the game. And I'm not talking about things like quality of life improvements or whatever. I'm talking about
you don't want to have Macho Man changed from the dragons in Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
You don't want to fight Macho Man instead of dragons.
That is so funny. I remember that one too. That was such a brutal shock when you see that. It's like, some people just recreate the game in their own image. And I'm like, I've never been into that. Never been into it. But so I think of emulation like that. Now, this is a great question by JJ. And you said I worry about this. I think about this a lot. I don't know if I worry, but I wonder about it for sure.
Even Progeny, right? Like even like can't that be an expansion thing? Like, why does that need to be at launch? Who's going to get to Progeny and do that before an expansion comes out? If this game's that hard to level, why is that in?
That was one of the ones that was around from the very, very beginning, though. That was something that wasn't an idea that they sort of came up with, because what I think happens, here's how I think this goes. What happens, I believe, is when VR takes questions from the community, or they do streams and they just read questions. And I think a lot of times they get questions that they don't want to say, like, no, we're not doing that, or that's not in our game. They kind of want to leave the door open, and they also don't want to shut people down, right? I guess if your question gets asked and they say, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
It's like leave a lot on the table. Like, that's something we could talk about in the future. Then that person's like, oh, they're going to do it.
Exactly. And that sort of, it grows from there. And I think sometimes what, the thing is, imagining things is free, right? Implementing things costs money.
I love that. That should be the name of this episode.
Imagining things is free. That sounds good to me, man. Because I do that, and that's what we do. Yeah. I mean, we're free to do that, and the community's free to do that. But I think JJ's right. There's lots of good examples of things that are imaginings and wonderings and hopefulings, hopeful things that they'd like to do, but don't really shouldn't be spending their time working on. There's lots of examples. Like they talked about like dispositions and how mobs are going to like acquire dispositions or detect certain classes like mana users. Like I think they riff on a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? Like this sounds super cool. And you can say that sort of in the moment, but then you look at the list for Alpha 1 and I'm like, man, all that stuff really? Yeah. Like there's a lot of stuff they got to get done. And there's just these flights of fancy are going to really put a extra expense and extra tack on more time, and nobody wants that, And so the question becomes, what can you put stock in? What are the realistic ideas? And it's hard to say, but I think you don't want to get caught up in some of the more imaginative answers. Sometimes, you just have to sort of judge for yourself.
Just toggle it. Next question here is from Moobert. I like this one a lot. He says, this one is focused on my particular favorite aspect of fantasy games, dungeon delving. What is your stance on traps? And have the devs given any can't say it. Derek, I can't say that word. Is that a word?
Intimation. Yeah, it's a word.
All right. Here's what I'm going to say. Have the devs given any idea on their likelihood as a dungeon staple to have? So basically are there traps and stuff like that. We've obviously seen reference to different hazardous climates like Toxin in recent streams, but I can't help to wonder, what about different climates like anaerobic wind shear and the endless possibilities of amazing roguery that can take place there within? No problem saying that word.
I'll take this one first. I think you probably have a way better answer than I do, because I like this question too. And I think what they have so far sets up for some really creative traps, right? You think of like a 2D platforming game where the design of that game takes you like into a pit trap. Like a lot of these 2D, talked about Mario earlier. It's a perfect example. Like they set things up to trap you. But traps in MMOs have always been limited, I think, to things like pits. DDO, we saw tons of them with spring traps, but DDO is sort of an outlier. They do really well with their stuff, but a lot of other MMOs, it's sort of stock stuff. I think of Pantheon. One of the ideas I had was kind of cool is like with their acclimation system. What if they did like a slippery ice ramp with like a quickly escalating, acclimation as it was like low at the beginning, but then you're on this ramp and you're sliding down and the atmosphere is increasing as you slide down it. That would be kind of cool, but there's lots of stuff you can do. And I like their talking about like what Moopert said about like you using their acclimation system and their climates to sort of enhance traps. But what do you think? What are your ideas on this one?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially as a rogue fan. You see this in a lot of MMORPGs at the beginning of them, like, oh, rogue has disarm, trap, and picklock, right? And then, oh, well, it's too OP that the rogue is needed for this and this, so let's kind of get rid of that. Then all of a sudden, dungeons don't have those things anymore. That happens a lot. And the other thing is, like you brought up DDO. DDO is the best game for dungeon delving I have ever played. It's made to be that way. So it's instance based. A lot of what I've seen go well only seems to work in instance, because let's say you're in a dungeon and you're traversing through and there's a trap and you disarm it, or there's a door you unlock and you go in. Well, in an open world, what if there's a group in front of you that just did all that and you don't need to anymore? Like, so that's it. That's right. A tricky thing in open world. And I'm sure there's a way that they could figure that out, but it's tricky in an open world. So it's a lot easier to do in instance. But you brought up a good point, and so did Moopert, that the total darkness, like darkness where even light can't be, you need magical light, is going to be really creepy and really cool, especially when the sound effects are kicking in and you can't see anything. That's going to be terrifying. I think a lot of people are going to be like on edge for that type of gameplay. And then, like you said, with the other, like the icy things, so there's a lot they're going to be able to do. I would love to still see traps that a rogue can disarm, or locks that they can unlock, things like that. But I guess we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm thinking like the underwater, like we were talking about earlier, like, those like steam vents in deep oceans, what if you're just down and there's no light and all of a sudden this steam vent, is popping up and they sort of like do it in that way? That'd be pretty cool. Anyway, it's a good question.
Nice. Okay, so the last question here is, if all raid content in Pantheon is open world rather than being instance, do you think it's feasible for non-hardcore raiding guilds to exist?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of people overestimate, raiding as being the be all end all of things. And there was a guild that, I was a part of for a while that has no interest in raiding, right? It's nothing about raiding is what they're interested in. So I don't know. I think it's a pretty straightforward question, and I could definitely see that being in Pantheon. I don't think that. I think Pantheon. You said it before. You made a really good point before. You said Pantheon's going to be really good for the RP crowd, and I think the RP crowd is sort of, when I think of non-raiding type guilds, that's what I'm thinking of. What about you?
Yeah, they can exist. I think that open world is going to create more challenge for people who want to raid. It's going to cause a lot of frustrations. It could hurt some guilds. If it's not able to be planned, we've talked about in the past, if you can't plan a guild raid because of, open world or camps being taken or bosses not being up for 48 hours or a week, that kind of stuff can really hurt the patience of raiding guilds. And that could really hurt the overall like gameplay experience for a lot of people. So that's something I'm still really looking to hope that they find a way to do it. As much as everybody hates instanced, it gave new life to allow people to organize and have a night of fun, even if they died all night. Like, it doesn't take challenge away. If it's still super hard, you may not beat it, but you can try. And I'd like to just still see some combo of that, where some of the boss fights themselves are instanced to create a better boss fight, and to be able to have guilds have a lockout timer and things like that.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the concern that's been raised before. And I think it's a valid concern. And we'll have to wait and see how they manage it, because I don't think, I don't want to see those guilds that can't, swing a 40-man, 40-person raid in a matter of minutes and get everybody there and, be shut out from things. They should have an opportunity for that, but we'll see. We'll see.
All right, well, that's it for this week's episode of The Rewind. Theric, as always, thank you for everything. Thank you for a great show. A lot of great discussion today. It's funny, we start these sometimes and we're like, oh, I don't know if we have a lot to talk about. And then
those are always the ones that go long and we have the most fun with, right?
Yep. So everybody, thank you once again for checking us out. As always, please leave your thoughts in the comments and let us know what you want more of on the Rewind, as this show is dedicated to you. Don't forget to, you can always download us and you'll hear about that when we throw the outro out. Everybody have a great night. Theric, thanks again.
See everybody next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube under the name Pantheon Plus. Also, be sure to follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter. Keep up to date on all Pantheon Rise of the Fallen information on www.pantheon.plus, the definitive source for all media of Pantheon. Until next time.